Well, good morning. And welcome once again to Dojo Church. If you are a first-time visitor to Dojo Church this morning, either here in the room or listening in today electronically, I just wanted to extend a special welcome to you today and tell you that we're extremely glad that you have chosen to spend a little bit of time with us this morning to find out what Dojo Church is all about and what exactly is going on here in this fellowship. If you are listening in electronically, I also want to extend you a special invitation to come and join us here at Dojo Church one Sunday morning. We are absolutely ecstatic that people are listening to our electronic channels. That's the reason we put those out there. But we also believe that there's no real substitute for in-person participation. And so if you're listening to this electronically, we just want to invite you to make the plan to come out and join us one Sunday morning. We're currently meeting at 11 a.m., which is obvious. That's what time we started this morning. But in the very near future, we're going to be moving to two services. We'll have a service at 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. That's basically starting the first Sunday in April of 2019 for the people who may be listening to this on the podcast sometime well in the future. But at that point in time, you'll have two different options. And again, for folks that are listening in, we just want to ask you to make plans to come in and join us. As a very quick reminder to the things that we've been talking about here at Dojo Church over the last little while, you all may remember that since the message series that led up to Christmas, we've really been drilling down on the directives that Jesus Christ gave His followers to love God and love people. We've talked a whole lot about what that looks like. We've spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out what that means to us. And over the course of all of this, we have defined love, right? We define love as being more than emotion. It is more than a feeling. But love is an action. And the act of love is behaving in a way that puts the needs of someone else above your own. It is engaging in things that benefit someone other than you to meet their needs. That is the person that you are loving through the act of loving. That's actually the kind of love that Jesus Christ modeled to and for the world when He went to the cross and paid our sin debt with His blood. That's how we know love. He did what He did for our benefit. That's how we know love. That's how we define love. And that's what we've been talking about over the last little while. Now, in preparing for these messages over the last little bit, and actually I would make the point that I've kind of seen this in preparing for messages over the course of the last year. I'm becoming more and more confident, maybe confident's not the right word, I'm more and more certain and have begun to understand the reason that we as humans, I believe that we as humans are made to be in community, that our hearts are hardwired and programmed for relationship. Now, I get it. I know that there are people out there that are like, everybody but me, because I'm an introvert, and those people are just wrong. And that was a joke. See my wife, I kid about that because I am the opposite. I'm an extrovert, and so I like being an introvert makes absolutely no sense to me. But I get it. I actually take it back. I do get it. I understand how society today can be very abrasive. But when you think about how we as people behave when we go through crisis, even people who are introverted, whenever they face difficulty in their life, when they lose a loved one, when they get a debilitating illness, when they lose a job, there are many different life situations and scenarios that can arise that once people have the opportunity to get their head wrapped around what it is that they're facing, they almost immediately reach out to someone else for support, right? That someone else could be a family member, a loved one, a pastor. Some people reach out to support groups, right? To a group of total strangers that they don't know, but that has something in common with them. My point is that looking at the way that we as humans behave during crisis is an indication that we need one another, that we are made to be in community with one another. Now, if that's true, if we're made to be in community, and if our hearts are programmed for relationships, then you would almost think that we've got this inherent superhuman ability to create and sustain really awesome relationships with the people that are in our lives. And if you take that and you weigh that against the relationships that you have with people right now, you'd probably be the first to admit, I don't have that superpower. Well, me either, because my relationships aren't perfect either. But there's a few things that I'd like to touch on. There's actually 3 things that I'd like to say about that. 1, I don't think it's a superpower. 2, I absolutely believe that you have it. And 3, I think the problem is what we also have that gets in the way. That's the issue. I think that there's something that gets in the way from us being able to truly and completely invest in someone else. I think there's something that gets in the way that stops us from allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and completely give ourselves into a relationship. And I know beyond the shadow of a doubt that the thing that gets in my way is me. And I'd be willing to bet that the thing that gets in your way is you. The topic that I'd like to talk about today is one of those that's super easy to talk about, but ridiculously hard to do because of how we get wrapped up in ourselves. Because we are so subconsciously selfish, we are so self-centered, it makes it ridiculously challenging to do. I will go ahead and tell you guys that I believe that today's message is specifically for followers of Jesus. As a matter of fact, I'm going to read a passage from you here in just a few moments that comes from a letter that was written by James, the brother of Jesus, and he wrote it to some of the earliest followers of Jesus. So even the reference that we're going to be looking at directs kind of these comments towards followers of Jesus. And so I really think that's where today's message is going to land. But if you're here today or you're listening in today and you wouldn't consider yourself a follower of Jesus, if you wouldn't consider yourself religious, if you can't stand church people, that's okay. I actually would encourage you not to tune me out just yet. As a matter of fact, I think that there are points in today's message that are so practical that you might be able to implement them in some of the relationships that you have. At the end of all of this, it may very well be that if your problem is the way that the church looks, right? If you don't feel like the church, the people that gather together as the church are characteristic of the one that they proclaim, which is Jesus, I tend to agree with that, actually. And so if we have these conversations about what Jesus actually taught, maybe you'd start down this process of, well, why are things the way they are? Maybe eventually you start asking questions like, who is Jesus? And if you have that question, that's a question that the pastoral team, many people in here would absolutely love to have with you. To introduce this topic, I'm going to ask you guys a few questions, okay? And when I ask you these questions, I'm going to make these phrases or ask you some questions, and I want you to think about what your response would be. Not what your answer would be, what your response would be. If you heard these phrases in conversation, what would it mean that you need to do next? Okay, here we go. I'm going to get into character too. I'm going to try to get into character so you understand all of the context clues that goes along with this, okay? So here's number one. Excuse me. Here's number two. Wait. I'm going to need you to run that by me one more time. Number three, I really like number three. Number three, you don't hear unless you're from around here. And it sounds like this. It goes, do what? That's one of my favorites, but it doesn't top, to me, it doesn't top number four, which you always hear coming from a parent to a kid, and they say it through their gritted teeth like this, and they say that one more time. Let me hear that come out your mouth one more time. What if you have heard these statements, if you put these statements into context, and you hear this in conversation, what is your response? What do you need to do next? You better be choosing your words wisely is what you better be doing. That better be what happens next, right? That's the implication here. And recognizing you guys' laughter, I take that as an understanding that you know what I'm talking about. You've had these conversations with people before. And recognizing that you understand that situation, I think it's pretty safe to say that we as people are pretty free with our words. I would go so far as to say I think we're actually pretty loose with our words. And in all honesty, I think that is very unfortunate. And the reason for that is because our words are powerful. And we know that. Every person in here knows that. Every person in here knows that they have been shaped, they have been molded, they have been formed over the course of their lives by the words that have been poured over them, whether it was from their parents or their friends or their teachers or their pastors or their karate instructors. It does not matter. The words that have been poured over you all your life has made you into who you are. And every one of us recognize that. If I ask you to think about it, it would only take you a second to remember a time that somebody's words lifted you up and made you feel great. It would also take you probably less time, half a second, to remember a time that somebody's words cut you down. You see, we all know the weight of other people's words because they sit on us. But unfortunately, we don't often think about how heavy our words are coming out of our mouth. At least some of the things that we say wouldn't indicate that. We recognize the weight of other people's words, but we almost believe that our words don't carry that same amount of weight. And again, I think that's super unfortunate. If we are going to spend time, if we have been spending time talking about what it is to love one another, talking about how Jesus directed His followers to love others the way that He loved them, right? That if we're trying to figure out what this looks like and how we go about doing all this, and by the way, I feel the need to interject right here that we've been talking about this for a little while now, loving others, and I fully anticipate talking about this for some length of time because honestly, I don't think the people who are good at loving others are really all that good at it. I'm going to tell you guys, if you think that the topic of loving others is the easy stuff, if you think that the pastors that talk about the love that you're supposed to show as a follower of Jesus Christ to the people that live in this world, if you think that's the easy stuff, I think maybe you've missed something. I think maybe you've made one too many assumptions, or maybe you're just not doing it right, because that is hard. And I'll tell you why. Because loving others, the act of putting their needs ahead of your own, actually requires something else out of you. Something that happens simultaneously. And that is self-denial. You have to forego your needs. You have to forego the things that you want in order to meet the needs of the other people, the person that you love, in order to put their needs ahead of your own. And that's hard. That's not easy for any of us. And I think that it's worth spending a lot of time to really understand what Jesus Christ told us we're supposed to be doing and why. If we're going to spend time doing that, like I said, if we're going to spend a whole lot of time figuring out what that looks like, I think that it's important that we take a few minutes and figure out what it sounds like as well. What it sounds like specifically when it comes out of our mouths. If you have your Bibles, I'd like to ask you to turn with me to the book of James. James chapter 3. While you're turning there, I'll say if you don't know where James is, it's towards the back of the New Testament. It's a very short book. It's only a few pages. If they get stuck together, you'll totally flip right past it. While you're turning there and finding it, I'm going to give you just a little bit of background on James really quickly. The first thing that I would say is I strongly recommend that whenever you go back and you're thinking about the things that we talk about today, I would encourage you not only to go back and look at this passage of Scripture specifically, but I would encourage you to read the whole book of James. It's not a long book. It wouldn't take you very long. But I'd encourage you to do that because I believe James was a very insightful person. And the insights that James have come out in the book of James. James, so you guys understand, is commonly understood to be the James who was the brother of Jesus. James, the brother of Jesus, who grew up, a little younger than Jesus, would have seen Jesus in a certain light. Maybe a different light than everybody else because he's his brother, right? Don't you see your siblings a little bit differently than other people see them, right? It's also important to point out that James wasn't actually one of the original 12 disciples. That's interesting. So if James wasn't one of Jesus' most dedicated followers when Jesus was preaching the things that he was preaching, what does that mean he thought about it? Right? Jesus and James both grew up Jewish men, right? And so James would have been dedicated, and rightly so, to the Jewish law and prophets. But because he wasn't a dedicated now there's no doubt that he heard what Jesus was preaching. But he wasn't one of the original 12. So the question that I have is, how did he go from point A, fast forward past the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and all of a sudden you find James as arguably the most influential leader of the Christian church in the city of Jerusalem? And that's no small thing. That's a big deal in the first century when Christianity was being persecuted so heavily. How do you go from point A to point B? And the answer to that is James had an encounter with the risen Lord. And it's very interesting, right? Like if you had an encounter with Jesus, right? I have all ideas that things would change for you. I think this is where James's insight comes from. I can't help but wonder how he went back after he had this encounter with Jesus, how he went back and rethought through all of the things that he believed that he knew, and about how the new understanding that he had, the light that shined on him from Jesus, the new lens that he could see things through, how that changed everything. I feel like it's those thought processes that made James so insightful. I think he's remarkably insightful. I highly recommend that you read the entire book. We're just going to look at a few verses today from the book of James chapter 3, beginning in verse 7. Verse 7 says, "Every sea creature, reptile, bird, or animal is tamed and has been tamed by man." Now, when James penned this, it's important to understand that when he says tamed these critters, right, like he's not talking about made them their pets, right? That's not actually what James is talking about. James is talking about mankind's ability to subdue all of the other creatures of the world, right? To really be on top of the animals that live on the earth. He continues, even having all of that power, having all of that position, being capable of subduing all of the critters on the earth, he continues in verse 8, "But no man can tame the tongue." No one. I'm pretty sure that what he means by that is not even one. And I don't think that this needs a whole lot of time and conversation. This is what we've just talked about. The fact that we get so caught up in ourselves that we don't really feel like our words carry weight, and so we don't really think about what we say. And so we let our tongue fly. It's not tamed. We don't keep it under control. I really want to camp out on the last part of verse 8 for a little bit. So again, James talking about the tongue, he finishes that next sentence. "It is a restless evil full of deadly poison." I want to camp on that just a little bit. When I read these words, the thing that comes to mind is one of these like fuss out sessions, right? Like you got one person who's raising their voice and they're using like this just derogatory, ugly language, right? Like giving somebody the two and what for, all Full Metal Jacket style, right? Like if you've seen Full Metal Jacket, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not recommending that as a movie to watch. I'm just saying, right? You know what I'm talking about. That's what comes to mind. And I think we all understand that type of language, whenever you've got one person just coming down on the other person with their language, I think you understand that that's not in that other person's best interest. That's not looking out for that other person. That's not lifting that other person up. That may make the person who's cussing and rearing up, might make them feel big, but it's not helping the other person. And I think we all recognize that. As a matter of fact, if you kind of back away from the severity of that, if you back away from the severity and you bring it all the way back down to the passive-aggressive comments that we make to others, I think deep down we know that that's not helpful either. And so it falls into that camp. Even these passive-aggressive posts on Facebook that aren't directed to anybody, that falls in the same camp. It's not helpful. It's not helpful at all. Again, I think that those things that we're aware of, the things that we know, we might not be good at controlling it, but we're already aware of them. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I do want to spend some time talking about the tongue being full of deadly poison. Whenever I first thought about this, I wondered, is James basically just saying that the tongue is bad, and so the first two words that he thought up was evil and poison, so he put those in there together? No. I think that James is too insightful to assume that he's generalizing. I think that when James said the tongue is full of evil poison, he meant something specific, and I think that we need to think about what it says. So let's think about poison for just a minute. What characteristics does any respectable poison have? There are a couple of things that are required. If you're objective, let's say that you work for an organization. This is not anything that you would do at home involving your spouse, definitely not. But if your objective was to poison someone, you would be looking for two things out of a material. What would be one of them? Anybody? Exactly. Don't steal my thunder. The first thing you'd be looking for is it needs to be deadly, right? It needs to end somebody. The second thing is that it needs to be undetectable. It can enter the body odorless, tasteless. It can enter the body undetected, but it's really interesting what happens. So it enters the body undetected, and then it begins to undermine the physiological systems that support life. And when those systems crash, the host dies, and the poison was successful. But the point that I want to make is that it goes unnoticed. If we think about our words, if we apply that to our tongue, and we think about what words we use that can go unnoticed and yet undermine the relationships that we have in our lives, that can kill the relationships that we have in our lives, are there words that we say that have that impact, that can be so powerful but also go unnoticed? Maybe I should ask it this way. Are there words that we say sometimes that we hope go unnoticed? Hopefully, if you guys are with me, you understand that what I'm talking about right now are commonly referred to as little white lies. Thank you very much. I found a study, and several people had talked about the study, and many authors or writers, I guess, wrote blogs about this study or whatever, and there was a very general consensus of what the results of the study said, and people were quoting people and not including references and things of that nature. So I have a hard time telling you exactly who wrote this, but I'm letting you know that I didn't come up with this on my own. I just liked the way this person kind of pulled this data together. I do know that the data he talks about is actually right. So I'm going to read it to you verbatim. It says, according to a 2002 study, so the study's a little bit old now, but according to a 2002 study conducted by the University of Massachusetts, 60% of adults can't have a 10-minute conversation without lying at least once. More than half the people can't talk to someone for 10 minutes without lying at least once. That sounds pretty bad, doesn't it? It sounds bad, but it continues. But even that number makes it sound better than it really is. Those people in the study who did lie actually told an average of 3 lies during their brief chat. So that's an average. And if you think about the timing, that means that many people can't go more than 3 minutes, not 10 minutes. You can't go more than 3 minutes without lying. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's actually the reason I selected this passage, because the person who wrote this knows what people are thinking as well. He says, and I know what you're sitting there right now insisting that you would be part of the 40% that didn't lie. Interestingly enough, that's what the liars in the study thought too. When they watched the tape conversations back, they were shocked at how many fibs they had told. And I think that makes a whole lot of sense, because we like to think the best of ourselves, right? We don't like to think of ourselves as untrustworthy. So whenever we say those minor untruths, we don't really think less of ourselves for it. They may not even register. Now, again, this study was conducted in 2002. Guy, it's 2019. That was a long time ago. I have all ideas that if the study was done today, the results would be much worse. And that's just, I may be wrong, but that's my speculation. And I'm totally going to blame technology for it again. You think about it and tell me that I'm wrong. Social media today, most people approach their social media account by the intention that they have is that they want to create an image that they want people to know them by. And they do that electronically, and they create this image. It's almost like they make up a person that they want to be, and they present that to the people who are out there on social media. Everybody does it. It's commonly accepted that that's what happens. The problem is that it doesn't accurately reflect who they are or what's going on in their lives, and that makes it a lie. It's an untruth. It's a lie. And because it's out there, that requires a propagation of that lie. That lie requires maintenance, right? But I think that it's more than just social media. I'm not going to blame social media totally and completely. You guys all have cell phones. You probably got one in your pocket right now. If you don't, it's just because you left it in the car. And we are so capable of being in contact with other people all the time. I think that it has increased our ability to lie to one another. You think about it. If you have ever texted anybody and you've ever told somebody, "I'm sorry, I didn't see your text," just because you didn't feel like dealing with them at the time, that's a lie. If you've ever texted somebody and told them that you were on the way while you're still rushing around the house with no pants on, that's a lie. Right. If you've texted your wife and said you were halfway home when you just stood up from your desk at the office, that's a lie. If you over-exaggerate the amount of money you make to impress your friends, it's a lie. If you underestimate the amount of money that you spend at the store to keep your spouse happy, it's a lie. If you say you're sick when you're not, there were some good ones. What were they? If you say you're sick when you're not, if you say you forgot something when you remember, it's funny that I forgot that one. If you say you forgot something when you remember, or you, there was one last good one. What was it? Or you tell somebody you ran out of time when you really just spent that time doing something else. They're lies. I think deep down, we all know that somewhere inside of us lives a little liar. Put the next slide up. Samuel Clemens, also recognized by his pen name Mark Twain, wrote this quote up here that many people recognize to be true. "A man is never more truthful than when he acknowledges himself a liar." It's kind of what we're talking about this morning. And you know what? These are small things. These are small things. I'm not hassling you guys about the conversations that you have. That's not my intention. I'm not proclaiming that I am immune to any of this. You know, I've done that before. I do that, right? And so I think that, you know, these things are small things. And I'm not trying to tell you that it's all the end of the world. But it creates a problem. It creates a problem because the biggest problem that I see is that society has allowed it to be acceptable, right? If your spouse sends you a text that's a load of crap and you know it right out of the gate, you let them off the hook. You let them by with it. It's just timing of when they're going to get home or whatever. But it's like the acceptance of it over time. We continue to tell these twists of truth or this version of our truth, right? And over a period of time, that activity changes us. It changes us. And before you know it, those little white lies that are being told on a regular basis, they turn into hiding things and denying things and avoiding the details so you don't have to get into it. And those type things cost us something. On a regular basis, they cost us friendships, they cost jobs, and they cause failed marriages. It's almost like the things that come out of our mouth are poisonous. Weird. Seems like James knew a little bit about what he was talking about. I think that it would go a long way. I think that it would do us well to understand two things. All right. One, how does that work so that we understand what we're risking when we lie? And two, why we do it. That's probably the most important. But I'm going to run through the two really quickly. To understand what the impact of lies are on our relationship, it's pretty easy to understand if you think about your relationship with others as an entity. You can't think about yourself and them in your relationship. You can't think about you or the other person and how those lies work out because any of us, all of us, you can't evaluate yourself without taking into account your intentions. But you don't have that advantage when you're thinking about them, so you don't take into account their intentions. And before you know it, all of a sudden you're justifying the lies that you tell one another, right? But if you think about that relationship as an entity, it's actually pretty easy to see what happens. For every relationship that we have with every single person, there is something that we share between that person that determines the level of the relationship. In other words, the very closest or deepest relationships that we have, we enjoy a lot of this. The relationships, the just acquaintances we know, we don't share much of this with those people. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Somebody say the word.
Yes.
Trust. Thank you, David. Trust. Trust, the trust that we have with the people in our relationships determines the level of the relationship we have with them. It's the same way with God, by the way. And the lies that we tell, simple and straightforward, they undermine that trust. It's really interesting to understand how it works, though. For the person that's being lied to, they reduce their trust they assign to the relationship when they find out about the lie, when they understand they've been lied to. But the liar, it's really interesting to understand what happens to them. You see, we as people, we have this mechanism inside of us that helps us make sense of the world, right? There are too many variables. There's too much going on in the world. So our brains, we try to simplify that. And a very common way to simplify that is to project yourself onto others. In other words, you assume that everybody else behaves the same way you do. So when you come to the table of your friendships or your job or your marriage telling lies, you automatically make the assumption that they are doing the same, even if they're not. And interestingly enough, your decisions are undermining your own trust. It is ridiculous. But that's how it works. We risk a lot by lying. So the question is, why do we do it? That's even more straightforward. We lie. I'm not going to say that it's true in every single example, because there are a select few exceptions, not near as many as we like to claim. But the vast majority of lies that you tell, the vast majority of the lies that I tell, they serve me. They benefit me. I tell them to look out for me. And the same thing happens with you. Now, I get it. Everybody wants to say, nope, that's not true. I'm lying to this person right now. I'm not telling them the whole truth, and I'm doing that to protect their feelings. That's a load of bunk. Do not believe that crap. Be honest with yourself. Stop lying to yourself. You don't care about their feelings. You're worried about your feelings. You're worried about hurting your feelings that you've hurt their feelings. Even if it's not your fault and you don't, the hurt feelings don't apply to you, you don't want to deal with their hurt feelings once they find out about it. You're not protecting them. You're protecting you. And if your lies protect you, if they look out for you over them, if every lie you tell is a choice for you over them, that's the opposite of love. Remember? It's the opposite. Just looking at two more verses. James chapter 3, verses 9 and 10. Again, this is James continuing about the tongue. We praise our Lord and Father with it, and we curse men who are made in God's likeness with it. Praising and cursing come out of the same mouth. My brothers and sisters, these things should not be this way. Now, I like to understand James's directive that it should not be this way, to say, stop doing that, right? But I think if you only think about it that way, you actually miss it. When you realize that what James is saying, that things should not be this way, you begin to understand that he's echoing the message that we've talked about, that Jesus delivered, about how the most important commandment, the one most important commandment, is to love God and love people. That those two go together because they're inseparable. You cannot love God and despise the people that He assigns a great deal of value to. You can't despise the people that He loves and really have a relationship with Him. It does not go that way. Brothers and sisters, it should not be this way. That's what James said. It makes no sense for it to be this way. And every time we lie, we're choosing me, which is an indication that we don't love them, which just might be an indication that we don't know Jesus. In closing, and I promise I'm closing, this sucks to talk about, I get it. I'm not going to wrap up this by telling you to lie less. If you continue reading in James, he makes a few comments that really illustrate that what comes out of your mouth is a reflection of what's going on in your heart. And so if I stand up here this morning and I tell you to lie less, I'm asking you to put a Band-Aid over your mouth. At the end of the day, what good does that do? The Band-Aid's eventually going to get wet and fall off. That's it. But if what comes out of your mouth is a reflection of what goes on in your heart, what I'd encourage you to do is to seek God. To know Jesus Christ is to love the people that He loves. John actually wrote, the one who does not know, the one who does not love does not know God, because God is love. I want you to think about what's going on in your heart. Maybe we could use our lies. Maybe we could use our lies as a litmus test to what's going on in our heart. If you're lying so much that you're unaware of your lies, and many of us are, just thinking about that in conversation, letting that sit in the front of your mind, you'll notice it. You'll notice it when you tell an untruth. I've noticed it all week. You'll notice it. And the question that I'll ask is if you could use that, right? If you understand when you tell your lies, and you understand that that is an example of how you have chosen yourself over them, and you're not loving them, then I'd ask you to keep up with the amount of lies you're telling. That's an indication of how far you are from God. If you don't love them, you don't love Him. Seek Him. Ask Him to change your heart. Ask Him to give you the courage to be honest. And as the things that are come out of your mouth, as you lie less, you'll understand how much closer you've grown to God through what He's done in your heart. That's for you personally. As a church, we have got to get this right. And to understand why, you just have to understand the flip side of the coin. Honesty promotes trust. Prolonged honesty, honesty over a long period of time, for better or for worse, hurt feelings or not, honesty over a long period of time creates uncommon trust. Uncommon trust in relationships between individuals or within a group gets noticed. And you know what it's noticed as? Love and unity. That's how that's seen, which are two of the most important things that Jesus said would characterize His followers, that would let the world know who He is. We've got to get this right. If the church, the group of people that gather together and call themselves the church, look like every single other group that gathers together and does what they do, what's the point? We've got to get this right. And the only way to do it is to draw together, trust one another, and most importantly, trust in God to do this for us. I don't know what's going on in your head and your heart right now. I'm going to pray here in just a moment. I'm going to get these guys to come up. They're going to sing a song. While we're going through this, if there's anything that you guys need to talk about, if there's anything that you'd like to pray about, Pastor Mark and I will be here at the front. We're more than happy to have that conversation with you. We'd absolutely love to pray for you. If there's something you guys feel like is on your heart that you just need to give to the Lord, this altar's open. You can do that right there at your seat. I would encourage you to let what you've heard today permeate your heart. And see where God takes you from there. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father God, Lord, you are an awesome God, all loving, all the time, God. And I just thank you so much for that. I thank you so much for being the source of our love, God. I thank you so much for being the source of our abilities. God, I just pray for each person here today, Lord, that you would move in our hearts, that you would make yourself known in a very real way. God, that we would be drawn closer to you and know your heart more. Through that, God, I just pray that your love would spill out of us onto the people that are around us. Help us to see the people around us in a different light. Help us to assign the same value to them that you do. Help us to see them as precious in your sight, each and every person. God, we know that you would want for none to perish, but all that would be saved, God. And I thank you for that desire. I thank you for that love that you have for all of your creation, that it is all inclusive, God. And I just pray for this body. I pray for this fellowship, for this group of people that you've brought together and called Dojo Church, Lord. I pray that it would be characterized by uncommon trust, that people would see love and unity, God, not because of anything we're doing, but because of you. Have your way in our hearts today, Lord. Soften hearts. Allow us to be vulnerable to you. And I thank you, Lord, for what you're doing. It's in Jesus' name that I pray.